Have you ever read a promise so ancient it predates every civilization we know, and wondered why everything that came after seemed designed to break it? Not the theology of it, the weight of it. The sheer, strange, deliberate effort to make sure one particular line of humanity never reached its destination. What you're about to hear isn't speculation dressed in scripture. It's what emerges when you read Genesis 3:15, not as poetic metaphor, but as a biological declaration of war, and then follow the evidence of what happened next. By the end, the question won't be whether something was trying to corrupt the human bloodline. It will be why that detail has stayed buried in plain sight for so long. Most people who know the Bible know the fall, Adam, Eve, the serpent, the curse. And in the middle of that curse, almost as an afterthought, a single verse spoken directly to the adversary. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. For centuries, that line has been read as a messianic prophecy, hopeful, forward-looking, settled. The seed of the woman will ultimately prevail. The story has a good ending, but that word, seed, carried something more precise than most translations let on. In Hebrew, the word used is zera, meaning biological offspring, genetic lineage, the actual physical continuation of a line, not a symbol, a bloodline. Which raises a question the text itself invites. If the Creator declared war between two specific seeds, two lineages, what was the adversary's seed doing in the centuries between that declaration and its fulfillment? The Book of Genesis doesn't leave that unanswered. Genesis 6, written no later than the 5th century BCE and echoed in the older Sumerian flood traditions, describes beings called the Nephilim, the fallen ones, born from a union between the Bnei Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, and the daughters of men. The text frames this not as mythology, but as the precipitating event for a global judgment. Something had gone wrong with the human line. The Jewish scholars who copied and commented on Genesis didn't treat chapter 6 as allegory. The Book of Enoch, a Second Temple text quoted directly in the New Testament epistle of Jude, spends considerable time cataloging the nature and aftermath of this corruption, naming the specific beings involved, describing the knowledge they transmitted, and documenting why their offspring posed a problem that ordinary moral failure could not explain. Early church fathers, including Justin Martyr in the 2nd century CE, read Genesis 6 the same way. Then gradually the interpretation shifted. Augustine reframed the Bnei Ha-Elohim as the righteous line of Seth, the Nephilim as merely wicked men. That reading became dominant in Western Christianity, and with it the biological urgency of Genesis 3:15, the seed war, quietly faded into abstraction. The ancient record, however, did not fade quietly. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovered between 1947 and 1956 in the Qumran caves near the Dead Sea include the Book of Giants, an Aramaic text expanding on the Enochian tradition and treating the Nephilim as literal physical beings whose corruption of the created order demanded removal. This means the Second Temple Jewish community, the same community that produced the biblical canon's final form, took the biological reading seriously enough to preserve multiple versions of it, which tells us that the abstraction came later, not from the source. Separately, geneticists studying ancient DNA have documented population anomalies in pre-flood and early Bronze Age skeletal remains that resist clean categorization within known migration patterns. Dr. Johannes Krauss of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology has noted that certain Levantine populations from this era carry genetic markers that don't trace cleanly to any identified ancestral group. That doesn't prove the Nephilim, but it means the human genetic record of that period is not settled, and the question of what entered the line is legitimate, not fringe. And here is what follows from that. If Genesis 3:15 is a biological declaration, if the Creator named a specific lineage that would carry the resolution to the adversary's corruption, then every attempt to contaminate that line before it reached fulfillment wasn't random evil, it was strategic, it was targeted, which means the flood wasn't only judgment, it was protection. So if the physical record and the ancient textual tradition keep raising the same question, Why has the mainstream theological conversation treated it as already resolved? What the Dead Sea texts, the genetic record, and the internal logic of Genesis seem to agree on is this. There was a sustained, multi-generational attempt to corrupt the specific human lineage through which the Creator had announced a coming resolution. The adversary did not fight the promise with argument. He fought it with biology. And the Creator's response, the flood, the narrowing of the line to Noah, then to Shem, then to Abraham, then to David, reads not as arbitrary election, but as the careful preservation of something that had to reach its destination intact. That's not a complete answer, but it is a direction, and it runs straight through the center of the entire biblical narrative. There is something quietly staggering about reading the genealogies of Genesis differently, not as names to skip, but as a protected corridor. Each generation, the line was narrowed. Threats appeared from within and without. Giants occupied the land the lineage was promised. Kings tried to eliminate the line's descendants, and each time the line survived. Not because the people were stronger, but because something was being guarded. What changes, if that's true, is not just how you read the Old Testament. It's how you understand why the arrival at the end of that line was met with the opposition. It was. If the adversary understood Genesis 3:15 as a genetic declaration of war and responded to it genetically, what does that say about how seriously a sovereign creator takes the promises embedded in a single verse? And if the line was protected across thousands of years through flood and exile and attempted genocide to reach one specific moment, what exactly was being delivered? What is still, even now, being protected in you?